Let me see if I can share my screen, by the way. Thank you so much for the invite. Apologies for not being there personally. I'm a bit unwell, so I prefer joining you online. I will try to do my best to present the article in as much detail as possible. Every day, every hour, it is more than true that there is something, there is a stronger confirmation, a piece of evidence that is new, confirming the reality of this article. So time to time, I will try to show you the links, connections, and draw parallels between the events that are taking place in our reality. So we will be speaking about vaccine hesitancy, acceptance, and anti-vaccination trends. How this movement started. I'll try to go over the terminology according to the article simultaneously to understand how all of this is taking place currently. We'll speak about the trends. The article starts with a very interesting quotation, which says, I would like to quote, cite it word by word, which is vaccination is a victim of its own success. Recently, the WHO, when they speak about World Health, they are saying that among the reluctance or refusal to vaccinate, this has a very detrimental effect on world population health. So if we draw parallels between the reluctance and refusal to vaccinate with health deterioration overall during the last 1 year and the coronavirus this 1 year, I can surely say that we have some information regardless whether we want it or we don't. We will speak about this in details. It has become more than obvious. Usually when we speak about vaccines, we have the model of 5 A's. One is about access, okay? The ability of individuals to be reached by or to reach recommended vaccines. The second one is affordability, the ability of individuals to afford vaccination in terms of both financial and non-financial costs. And a third A is awareness, the degree to which individuals have knowledge of the need for and availability of recommended vaccines and their objective benefits and risks. The fourth A is acceptance. There is a difference between uptake and acceptance. So acceptance is the degree to which individuals accept on their cognitive level. But uptake is quite different, of course. Uptake will be simply those people who take the vaccine. There are two groups. You might be part of the uptake group, like you might take the vaccine, but you're on your cognitive level, you don't accept it. You just have to do it because you have to do it. Just like now in our country in many places, I think starting from October 1, I haven't been following it recently, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe if you don't, either you take the test or you take the vaccine, the employer can fire them, if I'm not mistaken, correct? So in this case, you might, if you take the vaccine, that means it's not the same as accepting the vaccine, okay? So we will be speaking about this in the future. And the fifth A is activation, the degree to which individuals our nudge toward vaccination uptake. So now let's see. Let's see, how are these anti-vaccine group of people, how can we see the difference between anti-vaccine group of people from those who accept the vaccine and those who are hesitant? There's a very important point in the article which says that those who are anti and those who are hesitant are not the same. They are very, very different. Because people can be hesitant. They might have very legitimate doubts. They might be unsure about this or that vaccine, but this does not mean that they are anti-vaccine. Like, we cannot say this. There are such groups which dedicate and devote a large portion of their time to ensure that they raise the concerns regarding vaccines, and they are actively trying to convince others to join the movement in the hope to change the policies. With their words, they are trying to eliminate the population. Nevertheless, in the second part of the 19th century, these anti-vaxxers, that's how they were called, they didn't want it to be labeled in such a way. They didn't consider themselves as anti-vaxxers, but they believed that they had serious pieces of evidence and arguments based on which they choose to refuse vaccines. But again, we cannot just put them on one group and tell them this is it. All of them are anti-vaxxers. No, this is not the truth. There are people who do not take the vaccine, take into account a number of factors. For example, it can be for religious reasons. And let's say the leader of their religious group is against vaccines, so they also refuse to take the vaccines. Or it's because of a political grouping. So we cannot just join them in one, put them in one group and say all of them are anti-vaxxers. So it's a spectrum with a number of various groupings. So in our country, they might not be so important, but in the United States, when we notice, for example, the presidential electoral campaign, right? I was following it. It was very, they had a very important aspect pointed on how the president, what the president thinks about the vaccines for pregnant women. For me, it was very weird that the electorate make a very important decision based on such, for me, unimportant, minute details. So for us, we believe that we vote for a person, not their political campaign. So in an essence, it's obvious that these are of utmost importance around the world. So we definitely need to know the difference between these details. The author mentions that we should never, ever confuse anti-vaccine groups of people and vaccine hesitancy. So these are, anti-vaccine is totally different than hesitancy. They come on a broad spectrum. They have different connotations. When we speak about vaccines, starting from the 18th century, when we consider historical events, it is more than obvious that in various sessions, various periods throughout history, different points of and different sources of information have been circulating, which have caused people to refuse vaccines. Very often, this information is not scientific, without any scientific basing or evidence. So there were cases in France, Orthodox Jews in Great Britain. There are cases where some discourse was circulated that if you take this vaccine, then as a result, it is related to autism or deaf children are born, and these did not have the necessary scientific backing. So without scientific backing. The arguments set forth had no evidence, as a result of which people would refuse vaccines or they became hesitant to the vaccine. This is more than obvious nowadays. With the COVID, it's the same situation. We notice that a number of people refuse to take the vaccines. Why? Because in an essence, the information is so contradictory that just a lay person is unable to know the difference between these very different pieces of information. So it's the same situation with the vaccines. As you see, throughout the course of history, the anti-vaccine movement has taken a number of steps, very often anti-scientific, just to stop people from taking the vaccines. And now we are facing such a global issue because the information is so contradictory that people are unable to know the difference, to find out the truth, which is not. When we speak about resistance and acceptance, it is important to understand and take into account the medical and social researchers, because those social scientists play a crucial role. It is of utmost importance to understand how do health practitioners approach this issue. And the article was mentioned that when we speak about the anti-vaccine movement, it has a large number of followers, okay? It is of crucial importance here to see how the vaccine is perceived. What is the connection? What is the perception of vaccines? And the second important item here to discuss is what is the connection between politics and vaccinations? If we considered this vaccine before 2020, this would have had a totally different perception. But after 2020, after the reality of the COVID and the pandemic, definitely. Now the same article is perceived in a totally different way. It becomes much clearer to understand how politics and vaccinations go hand in hand. As already mentioned, there are political groups, religious groups, or whenever a celebrity can have a significant impact on the decisions, on the perceptions of the vaccine. For example, today, just an event that just occurred today, unfortunately, Taiko died, a very famous singer we know, because of the coronavirus. And the information circulating on social media is just so contradictory. Even the Ministry of Health came up with a quotation that's saying he did not die because of the vaccine, but he died because he was not vaccinated. However, the disease was on a very severe level. So one or two such cases are very important because the public seems to be placing a very high importance on such events. So how is the vaccine policies, how are they developed? When the anti-movement notice that their arguments are not working, they include pseudo-experts, and they introduce certain campaigns. As a result of these campaigns, and try to attract attention as much as possible. Here, a conspiracy theories play a crucially important role. They are the weirdest myths that are circulating. For COVID, they say it leads to lower birth rates, but it's not backed up scientifically. Infertility, it leads to infertility. These are falsely alleged to the vaccine. When we speak about vaccine policies, it is very important to mention here that aside from the anti-movement, it's important to have those who are vaccine critics. There's a group of people who are vaccine critics. They're not anti-vaccines, but they're considered vaccine critics. You cannot say they are anti, but they are not also those who are accepting it. So these group of people, if you give them strong pieces of evidence, they're willing to accept the vaccines. As a rule of thumb, they conduct research, they try to collect information from a number of sources in order to have a strong foundation to make the decision whether they should take the vaccine or not. So when we speak about vaccine critics, it's of crucial importance also to mention that it's one item when a person makes the decision. It's another issue when people should make a decision for a child. So there are two different cases. In Armenia, we see this notion. It's on quite a higher level. If I were asked, that our population, they are more anti or hesitant, I wouldn't be able to answer this question, because our population and the decisions they're making are on a very irrational foundation. In the article, the author mentions that many people make decisions based on an irrational grounds, whether they will take the vaccines or not. But the level of irrationality is quite high regarding these topics. So when we speak about vaccine critics and about public health, about health providers, vaccine criticism and health providers, you see a very interesting link here. The author speaks about a very interesting link. Many health providers, according to the author, even though the healthcare providers speak about the vaccines, they say, yes, you should take the vaccines. But when you talk to them out of their jobs, out of their office, they might speak against the vaccines. Or they say, we don't have enough evidence, or I don't fully trust it, I have my doubts, I have my concerns. This is paradox. It's a paradox. So here we see that even healthcare providers or doctors, they themselves have an anti-vaccine campaign. So here it becomes more than difficult. when the healthcare providers, they themselves are unsure about what to say, or when the healthcare provider is against. So there is a high level of hesitancy. So there are experts on one side who are regularly, they are promoting vaccines, and simultaneously there are experts who bring forth certain thesis arguments that there is, according to which vaccines have negative impact as well. And I might mention it once again, the author regularly in the article mentions that this is nothing new. Throughout the course of history, we have regularly seen this age-old battle. We've had this pseudo-information that has been circulating regularly throughout the course of history, that vaccines can have a detrimental effect, they can cause deaths. Nevertheless, on the other hand, there are also the counter arguments. It is an age-old struggle against anti-vaccinationism. And on the other hand, the flip side of the coin is that they can also, not being vaccinated, this can also cause deaths. So when we're speaking about the public opinion on vaccination, the reasons, the conditions, the influence, and the factors, in order to understand all these, it is of paramount importance to understand the role that healthcare providers play. If before the COVID pandemic, the role that healthcare providers played was not fully perceived by the population, but COVID came once again to reassure the important role healthcare providers played. So the vaccine-related topics are very often directly related, correlated with the opinions of healthcare providers. As already mentioned, the perception is directly related. Very often, there are cultural, socio-cultural factors. Very often, people think that the anti-vaccine approach is a traditional approach, which is not true, of course. If you're a traditional conservative person, then you should be against vaccine. The author mentions this in the article, saying that this has nothing to do with one another. And as a conclusion, the author mentions that as a conclusion, it speaks that once every decade there is a pandemic or disease, that there's an outbreak of this or that disease, and then the vaccination comes. Nevertheless, the perceptions regarding vaccines year by year, those who are against vaccines, the anti-vaccine movement followers, are increasing. What is the reason why people don't want to take the vaccines? Is very often people consider that if you give too much, people think that if you have too much information, it will be good enough for you to make a decision. And nevertheless, the author mentions that it is not a matter of information. It is not the lack of information that is what is the problem. Very often, even the abundance of information can cause the problem, can cause an issue in this matter. So too much information very often can have a negative impact in this context. And finally, And at the end, one of the important questions, existential question, to take the vaccines or not to take. It is up to you to make the decision. Nevertheless, to equip yourself with a good sources of information, trustworthy sources of information. And at the end, and don't base your decisions mainly on belief on the persons who are just reputable persons. Don't make decisions based on the sentiments. I would like to mention once again that the decisions made on merely belief or trusting something that somebody said, it's not a new phenomena. Nevertheless, it's an old age phenomena. Nevertheless, in the modern world, we should try to have a more critical approach, evidence-based decision-making process. What was interesting that at the end, the author also mentions that the authors mentioned that this article is not an order by a certain institution. It's a neutral research. Nevertheless, the feeling that I had while reading the article a few times, I had this feeling that they are more towards taking the vaccines. They are for vaccines, not hesitant and not anti, but the research was conducted on neutral grounds. It was the excursion from overview of historical events related to the